at the way, by the way, that this police state is now not just in the government. We talk about the weaponization of government, but it's in academia, it's in the digital platforms, which are part of the censorship apparatus, it's in the nonprofits. The police state is an octopus that is stretching across the public and the private sector both.
Yeah, although maybe there's hope even in the media. I saw today, Chris Cuomo, brother of former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, basically said, hey, you know what? Voting for Trump's not really an existential threat to our country anymore. Now, this is very contrary to everything he ever said on CNN, but I think even he is waking up to the policies of Joe Biden. And I don't even want to say Joe Biden, because I don't think Joe Biden's actually capable of coming up and crafting policy. I think Joe Biden is signing whoever actually is in charge is putting in front of him. So he's probably been very effective for the Marxists and the communists because they're not worried about preserving his legacy. If he destroys America in the process, that's fine for their political gain. But do you see others ever coming around to that? Do you see what's going on in mainstream media where, ratings are just going down? Because you're right. Like, I don't need to watch more than a couple minutes of, mainstream cable news because it's literally just the same thing. There is no counterpoint. There is no one willing to have an intellectually honest debate about anything. They just say what they say, and they say it over and over and over for 24 hours.
Absolutely. I mean, with regard to Chris Cuomo, so I predict this is what's going to happen. The next 48 hours are critical because police states love to maintain party discipline. So there will now be everybody that Chris Cuomo knows on his own side, which is going to be most of the people he knows, are going to be calling him and telling him to back off of what he said and to apologize and to claim that he didn't mean it, or that, he hadn't had enough sleep the previous night. In other words, to repudiate what he says, because they can't afford to have people like Chris Cuomo saying this kind of stuff. They have to sort of rein them in. And so they have a very effective system of bludgeoning to keep people in line. I think this is really a very scary phenomenon. It actually goes back when I had my case, and I lived in DC, so I was part of the DC culture. I knew a lot of guys who worked for the New Republic. I wrote for those magazines, the Washington Post, the New York Times. I would see those guys in Trover Bookstore. So when my case came up on campaign finance, I'd see these guys from the Washington Post, like at the bookstore, they'd be like, Dinesh, looks like you're getting the shaft, man. And I'd be like, well, you know what? I'm being defended by Megyn Kelly on Fox News, but it'd be really nice if you said that in the Washington Post. And they'd be like, sorry, can't do that. And so this is when I realized that there is a system on the left of making sure that on issues that are important to them, there's virtually no deviation. I mean, this is why not a single journalist on the left ran with the Hunter Biden story, because they knew. Think of it. Think how crazy this is. You got thousands of journalists. This is not a police state like Russia or Nazi Germany where Goebbels puts out an edict. No journalist can write about the Hunter Biden story or you'll be executed tomorrow morning. No, you got all these independent journalists, but none of them did it except the New York Post. Now, why is that? I think it's because they knew that any guy who does that is going to have a sword falling on his head. His career is going to be destroyed. He will never be able to work in this town again. And so the level of conformity is backed up by the fact that the police state and the left can enforce this kind of mass obedience.
Yeah, no, and you see that a lot. I mean, I get that a lot because, again, prior to politics and stuff like that, obviously being in business in New York, you're surrounded by a lot of liberal journalists. And and I see it with my father's and frankly mine, because I'm guilty of civil fraud in New York before they ever heard my case in this nonsense. And we're going through it. And now this supposed victim was on the stand yesterday, the bank, and they're like, no, everything was great. What are you talking about? We do our own due diligence. We did everything. Everything was paid back. We made hundreds of millions. Trump was a whale. We used him and those assets to get other business. It was a wonderful relationship. We wanted to do more, not less. And I have people, that I knew at the New York Times, at ABC News that are like, oh, this is so crazy. Like, this is so ripe for future corruption. If an attorney general can just come in 5 years later and say, we don't like this deal, we're going to sue you for $1 billion and try to take away your company because you didn't donate perhaps to my political campaign. They're saying these things. I go, I agree with you. You're 100% right. Where's your story about that? Where's your story about what happened today that the alleged victim is saying, we weren't a victim. This was one of the great deals. Trump was we 10% of our revenue came from Trump organization deals. Where is that article? And it doesn't exist. Even if it's said clearly in court, even if that press is in the courtroom watching, even if you think that's clearly newsworthy, given how much they would cover the fraud allegations that are total nonsense, still haven't seen the article. I still haven't seen the story. I haven't seen the talking heads even bring it up, not even once. And these are the people that are bringing it up to me. So you're 100% right. How do you stop that? How do you change that?
We've reached a point where you can't change it, you have to replace it. And by that, I mean virtually everybody who wears a tag called journalist in this country today is not a journalist. I mean, here's the proof of it. Let's take, for example, the New York Times. You and I know that if not just you or I, let's just say a credible source on the left were to walk into the New York Times and say, we have undeniable proof from the horse's mouth that the 2020 election was stolen. We're going to sit down with you, show you the evidence. You can ask all the questions you want, and we will convince you to your satisfaction that the 2020 election was stolen. And you go through that process. Do you have any doubt that the next day that article would not be in the New York Times? They would not publish it. They would let it be. They would not touch it. Obviously, that's true. And what that tells you is the New York Times is not a real newspaper. They're not trying to pursue
but
truth.
Dinesh, I think
They're
it's
not
actually
interested in what happened. They are propagandists, pure and simple. They're, in that sense, no different than Pravda or Izvestia.